Gentlemen, I wanted to open with a question this morning. We've been talking about the promise of cloud and software-based communications for quite a while now. From your perspective, how much have things really changed inside the enterprise at this point? We always seem to be ahead of the curve, obviously, but what's really going on in the enterprise? Alan, you want to start?
Yeah, so I think communications is software, period, end of report. I think all too frequently we've thought of ourselves as still the telco elements. We're simply just software that rides on top of telco. And I think some of the things that Bob described in the whole Microsoft presentation, which is at its core, it is intelligent communications, and that's software based. And I think if you think of it from a use case point of view, it's the intelligence of the software which is creating use cases. And use cases, we've gotten our head sort of, in some ways, overly wrapped around, in my view, around the PBX or the contact center or whatever. But there's a sort of a limitless number of use cases that, as we embed software-based communications into every other sort of home page that we deal with at any point in time, a website, a mobile app, any sort of workflow app, what have you, the ability to click to communicate is just a software-enabled element that is going to be used everywhere in our view. So I think we have to untether ourselves from the focus on restricted to a particular device, cell phone or hardline, and untether ourselves from the notion of use case, PBX, contact center, and think about communications far more broadly.
To me, I think what's changed is software allows you to make changes and to be rapid in how you respond to customer demands. And as customer expectations change and as the rate and pace of customer expectations change, you need to be able to embrace software to be able to make that move fast enough. And that's what we've seen with folks like ING and Liberty Mutual, who've been looking at the previous way of doing things and saying, I can't move fast enough in this old way. I have to be able to embrace software. I have to be able to embrace an agile philosophy to the very core of our enterprise to be able to make these transitions, because otherwise we're not going to be able to keep up. We need something where we have complete control. We need to be able to change everything. We need to be able to test, to experiment, to A/B test our customer experience. And only embracing software is going to get you there. And I think we've seen a huge transition of folks who really embrace that and say, now's the time, we have to move.
Yeah, I just add a few things. On stage we showed a bunch of devices that run, in our case, our software, but I'm confident they'll run other providers' software as well. In a world where our collective services are being updated in real time, even the device manufacturers, the partners that we all leverage, recognize the need that, hey, we need to run the provider's software on our devices to keep in sync. Just like the software on your mobile phone is always keeping up to date with the service. So that notion of software, even on the hardware devices that we're used to using, of constantly keeping up to date, has really made a dramatic shift in just a year. The other thing I'll mention is, I think it was 10 years ago, my colleague and I here from Cisco, together we sort of coined the phrase unified communications, and we've been talking about it for about the last 10 years. And now I think all of us are really talking around intelligent communications. And you can't have intelligence without software and the cloud. You just can't harness all of that power without software in the cloud.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you there. Unless you have moved to the cloud, unless you have moved your data to the cloud, there is no way you will get AI, ML, any of the interesting current things that are happening in the Valley going. I just don't see how you could do that with the on-prem solution, on-prem software in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, it's not going to be efficient, right? And so we, Urban Communications, we work principally through carriers. So this is really going back into a carrier's wheelhouse where, why would a carrier want to resell anything that's premise-based when they've got the power of a network to be able to provide that service ubiquitously across any kind of device? So not a contrarian, but I think there is a place for devices. They're going to be prevalent in businesses for a long time. One of the things that we've been involved in is upgrading the phone system at the Pentagon, right? There's certain requirements, some of the JITC certification, where we actually had to have something on premise. But what's on premise is about a tenth of the size of what was there before. And one of the values is we didn't have to touch any of the endpoints, because to your point, the endpoint is really almost irrelevant at a point in time. As long as it's user-friendly, customers they know how to use it, everything is going to be available on your own mobile device going forward, right? And it's got to be available on any pane of glass. So I think we're all seeing the same thing, and it's certainly prevalent at this show.
One of the gating factors is security. You know, you brought it up with the Pentagon. A lot of the shift over to software or to cloud is going to hit a realistic discussion around what the security requirements are. I think most of the professionals in this room are aware of the new PCI security requirements that are hitting a lot of endpoints in the marketplace. In some cases, software can be a more elegant solution to that problem. In some cases, it can be a gating factor.
Yep.
So we put a lot of focus and attention on that particular piece of it. I think the other lens is, what are the customers, or what are they doing that's driving the need? Not just the technology availability or the architectural enablers, but what's happening in the business. And we see widespread that companies are redesigning their Class A and B office tenant refinish to have fewer square footage per employee, more shared workspaces, fewer offices, and this is driving people to be more mobile. So if we think about more traditional companies, of which there are many, we don't want to discount them. These are companies that have very low degrees of collaboration necessarily between work groups, and they need to drive cost out of their business. They need to be served. But they are increasingly redesigning their offices so that mobile workers are highlighted. And in that space, you're going to see a move to software. You're going to see a move to cloud. You're going to see fewer fixed workstations with a phone, or you'll see more video workstations that allow people to collaborate that way. That's a huge, huge change taking place right now. I have not met a single customer rolling through our EBC that is not doing some type of massive office redesign effort to take advantage of this. And it's dollars. It goes from 700 square foot per employee down to 250 square foot per employee. That's billions of dollars that the industry can take out of their cost structure in corporate real estate.
Just one comment. I mean, I think what's interesting and sort of tacking on that, just the example on the square footage, it's just another example of the transformation that, you know, it's obviously an overused term that everyone's going through. I think what's important is to think about communications. Really, you have to think of it, you know, end user in, where what is it trying to enable? We're all going through all of our customers are going through having to go through some sort of business transformation, a digital transformation, because they're all looking over their shoulder to the more digitally transformed competitor who's got a bullseye on their back. I think what's interesting is as our companies have gone through digital transformation, communication has been an underappreciated element of it. I always have this visual metaphor in my mind of somebody on the old black rotary dial phone talking to a colleague saying, we got to get that website up so we can do e-commerce versus physical retail. Again, a lack of understanding or appreciation of the significance of communication in helping our clients digitally transform. That's where I think that's going to change meaningfully, because again, does communications make your employees more productive? Does it help you engage more tightly and in a more intimate way with your customers? Does it help the company ultimately with a better business outcome? That's got to be the focus, and I think all these tools that we as vendors are creating, the goal is to do just that. Yeah. And it's all software-based.
I think sometimes the show has a little bit of a skewed view of the real world. Right, and there's still a massive amount of traditional systems out there. In fact, in the sessions I've done, I've asked people, you know, show of hands, who's running more of a traditional system, who's running more of a cloud-based or software system, and the majority of people are still running traditional systems. And there's a certain level of difficulty. I think nobody disagrees with the vision of intelligent communications and where the world is going to be, and one day our phones will talk to us and tell us what to do. But the roadmap from getting there from here isn't easy, nor is it obvious, right? So how are you guys helping your customers? Like, if somebody has a system that's 4 or 5 years old, it's not near the age of retirement, and most CFOs aren't going to allow you to rip that out, right?
We've got 85 million of them, right?
Yeah.
We've actually created an enterprise transformation framework. And to exactly your point, one of the things I think is important is to respect the embedded investment that an enterprise has, right? But they want to be able to protect that investment. They want to layer on innovation, right? So it's pretty easy to do, right? If you say, look, inventory of your PBXs that are not IP enabled, those probably need to go, right?
I think it's easier to
You start with
say than
SIP
it is to
trunks,
do.
right? You layer new UC services on top of SIP trunks. You put embedded communications as appropriate into workflows. There's a way of doing it in a thoughtful way without coming to an enterprise and saying, you got to rip everything out.
But it is changing. I mean, I look at the software experience that we've created in a more modern product like we have with our enterprise message. I'm going to try not to be a vendor shill up here and throw names around, but you look at that experience, and it's very much about meetings, very much about enterprise messaging. How does that system work with a traditional system is a key question. We put a lot of money into hybrid in order to answer that question. You've got, I made it sound like all companies are either a meatpacking plant. I live in Denver, Colorado, by the way. We have one up in Greeley, whom I visited. And they are not being digitally disrupted. They are competing with other people who are beating them on cost, and it's important for them to sweat asset. But even within a company, even within Cisco, we have pockets of users that are not going to take advantage of that modern experience. And then we have very agile teams that will. And then we've got very mobile teams like the Salesforce, which I represent, which are walking around on their mobiles all day. And gluing those three experiences together, very important. Hybrid becomes a critical piece for us.
Absolutely.
How do you have that experience, use the new thing and the old thing at the same time?
I had the pleasure now, 3 times in a row, 3 different companies of helping the company move to the cloud and move customers into the cloud. And it's a phenomenally difficult problem for legacy companies to solve. But you always have to go back and go, at some point in time, there was the world's best horse buggy manufacturer. And they were making better wooden wheel, and then who came along? Ford Model T came along. Where would you want to be? Do you want to be the guy who is looking at the back of the horse in front of you, or do you want to be the guy who is driving a Ford Model T? And we are now at the stage where we have both the horse-drawn buggy, we have the Ford Model T, and there is a group of companies which is driving around with a ludicrous mode, pressed fully down and right foot down. And it is only up to you to decide where you want to be there.
Yeah, I think there's 2 things here, Zeus. I agree with you, but the transition from premise to cloud, I think we often see that the challenge is not particularly that folks are just purely strapped because and restrained because of the deprecation or depreciation of their current model, but more that in many places the cloud offerings today aren't achieving and can't deliver what they need. So, contact center is still 85% premise. And there's a reason for that, because if you're trying to get tens of thousands of agents on, traditionally, contact center cloud offerings have not been able to scale to that. Or if you're trying to really control every part of the experience, premise-based applications have been one of the only ways you can do that. And that's what Twilio has spent a lot of our time focusing on, is how do we give you something that scales to 50,000 agents? How do we give you something where you have complete control? And so I think it's on vendors and on infrastructure to be able to provide that scale in order to unlock that transition. That's one thing. And the second thing is, I think as you look at that transition, you talked about hybrid as a transformation path, but hybrid doesn't need to mean, hey, go buy our new hybrid box and deploy a new hybrid solution. Hybrid can mean, okay, you've got your investment, and you can look at what currently works in your enterprise, but every time you want to add something new, every time you want to change something, every time you want to add a new channel, every time you want to try experimenting, using tools like Twilio, you can gradually augment what you have. And it's like hybrid, but it's a different approach to hybrid in the sense that you can test and you can try, and you should never be in this situation where the move from premise to cloud involves one weekend where you are absolutely terrified as you flip one switch on and one switch off.
Very good point.
Yeah, it's very true. I'll just add that You know, we believe very heavily in hybrid. My team is actually accountable for migrating customers to the cloud. We have a thing at Microsoft called Fast Track. Any customer of 150 seats up to our largest customer with 2.4 million seats, we provide an assisted migration to the cloud. It represents several $100 million of investment that we make. We have moved thousands and thousands and thousands of customers to our cloud. Now, I will say a lot of those moves have been things like email and file shares and things like that. I'm in complete agreement with those on this panel that would say communications isn't like moving email. It's not a 3-month effort. It's a building by building type of effort. And I think all of us are here in the long haul with things like hybrid connections for customers.
You know, I'm sorry, Al, you kind of touched on a question I think I wanted to ask, and that's, you know, when enterprises think about software and they think about cloud, is that one and the same? I mean, as they plot a transition to cloud, is that the same thing as thinking about how they're going to use software communications?
Yeah, to me, there's the technology side where software and cloud, I think you can potentially categorize them together, but then there's a philosophy of how do you embrace that and how do you think about what challenges that you have. And it's a philosophy and the mindset, the mentality of adopting software that we see when people really embrace that, it gives them a different approach. So adopting a cloud-based infrastructure to power, whether it's your contact center or collaboration or anything else, is one thing. But taking a software mindset to thinking, well, now we have complete control. Now we can integrate this with absolutely anything, and we can try things, and we can move fast. And you know, folks like ING have really embraced Agile to the core, and so they go off and they'll spend a week and do a sort of a design thinking workshop, and then go build something and test it and deploy it and see how it works. And so you see things like using video to do identity verification for account opening that just came from an idea. It just came from a thought. Maybe we could do this. But because they've embraced the concept of software and embraced the approach of testing, moving fast, and trying things, they're able to get something out really quickly. If you were to do that through the process of, well, maybe this is a good idea, so let's write an RFP and then spend 6 months evaluating that RFP and then go into trial and analysis mode, you'd never do it. You'd never do it. But embracing the approach of testing, trying, and being able to do things in a really lean way makes a huge difference.
The key is the mental setup. If you're approaching this transition from the point, I'm going to do the same thing I did yesterday, just a little bit better and a little bit cheaper, that's probably not the right way to go about it. You have to go onto this journey knowing that it's all about your customers and your employees, right? You are there as the enterprise to provide the best possible experience to your customer. Getting that customer experience and employee engagement and employee experience together in one unified story is the key in my mind. And then the cost and the effort and the pain of this transformation actually can be justified. If it's just a cost exercise, I don't think that's the right way to look at this.
The hard part about that, though, is understanding what that end game is. I think if you ask most customers, like if you move to this model, in fact, if you look at just the adoption of stuff, we typically, when we migrate to the new thing, we try and make it look like the old thing for a period of time to give us comfort, and then we figure out what we can do with it that we couldn't do before. And I think in this industry, one of the reasons, why people aren't willing to throw away that 2-year-old PBX is because they're not really sure what those things are that they could do tomorrow that they can't do today. And so I think there's a bit of a chicken-egg situation. Even with this show, there's so much hype around the team collaboration tool. The overall penetration rate of that's pretty low, and most workers don't really get how it can change the way they work until they use it. Right?
But that to me is not just looking at software equal cloud, right? It's really taking the fact that the phenomena of IT and telecom are coming together. One of City of Los Angeles, one of our biggest customers, and we're in the process of migrating them over to unified communications. But when they see what we're able to do from their IT side, to be able to go into their website and put a visual attendant there and be able to click to call through all city services, so the constituent relations is dynamically better because they've bridged the web world with the telecom world. So the assumption, of course, is it's all software. And the kind of interesting thing, their CIO had an interesting view on in devices. She literally said, look, I'm providing soft clients, because everybody has a laptop where they've got a laptop or a PC. So if you want a phone, you get that out of your own operating budget, kind of trying to drive behavior.
I think the software versus cloud question comes down to architecture. The old way we wrote software, sort of in a monolithic stack, particularly in real-time communications, lent itself well to a sort of a hosted or a colo-based data center approach.
I pick up my PBX and I put it in the cloud.
Right.
Fundamentally, I don't change the architecture.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
But and in that instance, obviously I'm going to have greater volume at 2 p.m. than 2 a.m. and I'm going to sort of, obviously stock my blinking lights so I've got capacity for 2 p.m. and then some, and then I have an excess infrastructure for the 2 a.m. time.
Right.
When you've architected your stack from a microservices perspective, it has to be public cloud. So what Dan was saying, if you're just trying to do it kind of a little bit of a lift and shift because you're still architected as this monolith and you only see it as a cost savings, it's such a pain. Yeah, maybe a cost savings, but you're really not changing sort of the operating model. But when you've re-architected as microservices that by their nature go from 0 to infinity just about in terms of scaling up and down, you have to be in the auto-scaling environment of a public cloud infrastructure.
Gating factor, I think, when a lot of conversations that I've had with customers has come down to international PSTN breakout and the availability. If they have sites that run in 20 different countries, that can be a challenge. It's not insurmountable, but it is a challenge. And they want a no compromise experience. They want to know that their retail stores can park and page the same way they always did, that their key system emulation features will still work, but they also want to have the ability to have enterprise messaging and ad hoc client support in a much lighter weight cloud-based software-centric model. And as their expectation and the reality of what we can deliver come closer together, I think you'll see this whole adoption start to really accelerate. They are not, in my opinion. I mean, with the opening for this session, the teaser said the reality check. They are not there yet, but we can see, and anybody who reads the analyst reports can start to see that people are not buying as a whole TAM more phones. That's not happening. But they are buying more UC applications, things like meeting applications and WebEx and things like that. So Teams and other products that provide that sort of UC applications category. At what point will they start to touch? We're always 5 years ahead at this conference.
But
if you think it's next year, it's in 6 years.
Isn't it a function? I agree with you fully that they're buying less phones, but it really is what is the UI? At the end of the day, I communicate from what? So traditionally, we communicate from a phone, and then a cell phone or a hard line. Where we're heading, I think, is you're communicating from virtually anything. So there's click to communicate from within phones, clearly, soft phones in your desktop, but increasingly whatever application or website that you're interacting with. And the way I think about it is that whatever your favorite internet connected device you happen to be on interacting with that website or that app, the mode of communication you choose, video, audio, messaging, is a function of personal preference and the limitations of the device. If it doesn't have a camera, you're not doing video. If it doesn't have a speaker and a microphone, you're only doing messaging. So, but I think you have to have this expansive view of communications. It's going to happen in sort of this ubiquitous way across, sort of everything as our UI as it relates to.
Well, it'll become embedded in everything, right?
Right.
Of course.
Right. And it'll be embedded through these microservices.
I agree entirely.
So
I agree
give us-
entirely. You have bots that can basically find you an open meeting room. You just walk in, you register with the front desk person, the bot will be able to find you an open space for you to work and will find you a meeting room if you want to have a meeting. I could do that in a traditional communication stack, but it would be very expensive. It would be difficult for me to replicate site to site. Bots do it automatically. It's a way for us to just do it once in the cloud. It's available to all users. So back to your point about UI being very pervasive, we need to rethink that. Absolutely true.
So give us some examples. You guys are, no doubt working with some leading edge companies, and maybe you can't name their names. And when you think about that ability to put communications anywhere, what are some of the more interesting mashups that you see?
I'll give some. And yes, we just demoed a bunch with Teams, but when you're in your car and you want to have a conference, you're not necessarily going to use the Teams client. So we have connected car, like with BMW, that uses our platform. I think a lot of us are involved with things like telehealth and telemedicine and integration. The doctor is using Epic. The patient on the other side is using a custom application that puts them into a waiting room. There's telebanking, teleconsultation, where again, our platforms are being used, but they're being served up. We're going to where the customer is, not necessarily using our app, if that makes sense.
Yeah, there are some phenomenally interesting things happening in the Valley right now. I think the change in communication is here, right? Voice is very old school. Meetings, chat, messaging, that is the future for the younger generation. That is the future probably for the industry. But then you start going, why are we still routing these network packets the way we've been always doing it? So there is now this whole movement to the cloud edge, where you go, if you are sitting next to me and I call you on the phone, right, my network packet goes from the iPhone to Amazon to your data center to your phone. You go, what a phenomenal waste of time, effort, bandwidth, and money. If you are next to me, why is there not some intelligent router here in the room that can know that you are next to me and essentially fork the call over straight to you? You will get there only if you have a proper architecture like Alan is talking about. Then you can go and you can embed your microservices in all these cool little IoT devices that are going to be all over the place and that you can actually already see in the real world in some parts of the country.
So to me, the interesting thing about communications is not just communications on its own, but how do you integrate it with the other technologies that are out there, right? Like we have a customer called Simply Business, who are a division of Travelers in the UK, who've been building their own machine learning into a contact center built on top of Twilio, and integrating machine learning at every single stage creates some amazing experiences in terms of how you are real-time feeding interactions to the agent that is proven to have the highest likelihood of getting the highest revenue conversion out of that interaction. But the challenge of integrating machine learning is, you can't go buy a machine learning box. Like, okay, we've deployed our machine learning box, now we have machine learning on everything. You have to be able to get the hooks and the integration at every layer of the stack, at every step of the customer journey. And you need different machine learning approaches, different AI approaches for different challenges. And so you need to be able to have the control to think about how am I going to add this in the way that I want. To me, that's a question of what makes a platform, in the same way that when you think about what makes a true cloud offering, if you're looking at a vendor that has like cloud option 1, cloud option 2, cloud option 3, and they have completely different scaling properties, that's not cloud, that's a premise-based architecture forklifted up into the cloud. And you have to be able to, you have to have the right architecture to be able to do these integrations, these mashups, these approaches of how am I going to think about blending the different technologies together.
So one of the issues that comes up with this, though, which I think is Jonathan Rosenberg actually touched on it in his keynote, which is, I think, one of the undertold problems that we're going to run into in the world is the security issue around federated clouds. In fact, I was at a conference in Vegas a few weeks ago, and Kevin Mitnick was speaking at it. If you don't know who he is, he's widely renowned as the world's first hacker. He does a lot of penetration testing. And he was asked, what do you think is the biggest security risk facing us in the future? And he said, cloud federation. It's very possible that there's a vendor on the show floor that builds his product using Nexmo or Twilio, hosted on Azure, right? Uses somebody else for billing, and so they might put on their website, this is what we do to secure our customers, but they're also so dependent on all these other vendors to be able to, and if there's a break somewhere in that chain, there's a breach, right? And everybody gets affected. So how do you, as you guys, for most of you here, not only do you facilitate others doing things with your platform, but you're also reliant on other vendors. How do you make sure that your customers are indeed protected? Because that's a big leap of faith. The example you gave, Bob, of being in your car, think of what that takes to make that work and how many vendors have to, make sure that they're,
It's something that we're all over, right? So part of the heritage of the company is session border controllers, right? And making sure that we can protect the carrier's network, right? As well as enterprise session border controllers. That's something that we've actually introduced into something called Ribbon Protect, which is really kind of taking what a firewall can do in an enterprise, what session border controllers to do in both the enterprise as well as the carrier edge. Put on top of it, and this is with your issue of federation, and artificial intelligence to be able to suck out the information in terms of who the bad actors. Because if they're trying your company one minute, they can't get in, then they try your company, right? Probably the same guy, probably the same IP address, right? So if I'm providing that level of service to be able to identify who those bad actors are, I can shut them down quickly. There's a benefit. It's something that we're actually going to have GA the middle of the year.
You heard Jonathan talk about end-to-end. He said it much better than I can. I hope everyone got a chance to hear Jonathan's discussion around end-to-end encryption. That's the Cisco answer for how we're approaching that particular piece in the cloud. Incredibly important.
I'd say there's a couple things. In the old days of custom outsourcing, you'd have a big protection clause in there that essentially put the value of that custom outsourcing contract at risk if anything happened to your business. We essentially have to provide the same for our customers for end-to-end end-to-end support, and we have legal requirements that we have, and then if we don't meet those obligations, Microsoft, as a multi-billion-dollar company, is liable for that. But one of the things I'm actually seeing, because I think you're absolutely right, people are going to compose solutions as well. They're not going to all, I'd love them all to come to Microsoft. I'm sure my colleague would love them all to go to Cisco, but they will compose solutions. I mean, there are opportunities. AIG just came out with cybersecurity insurance that now people can buy insurance to protect themselves about these composed solutions. So there's a whole new area evolving around insurance to help customers that are going to compose these solutions that heretofore wasn't necessary.
Yeah, I mean, I think trust has to be the #1 objective of any cloud vendor. Whether you're looking at ISO 27001 or GDPR, these are all things that we spend a lot of time working on. But I think the key point here is if you are looking at transforming your communications, transforming your customer service, if you partner with someone who takes that seriously, you effectively have the combined engineering resource of that entire company working on securing that data. I mean, we have huge teams just focused purely on how do we protect the data, how do we ensure it's encrypted, how do we make sure the security is there, how do we make sure that we help you achieve GDPR compliance or whatever, so you can actually go faster to achieving those objectives by having this combined group of folks working together to achieve that for you.
Well, whether we are living in a hardware world or a software world, I think security and a reminder to keep things secure is a good place to end on. So, gentlemen, I thank you so much for your time today. Been a great discussion.